Should I move it close? Ooh, I'll move it further back. Alright. Hello. So, please excuse the harsh lighting. It's a cloudy day, so I have to put on the overhead light, which is not very flattering, but that's okay. I feel like I'm in Masterpiece Theater with all the books behind me. Alright, I am making a video, blog right now that coincides with the actual written blog that I posted earlier in the week. The reason why I'm doing a video blog is I just wasn't sure if doing a video would actually be more user-friendly to people who have a hard time reading like a 12-paragraph editorial. So I wanted people's thoughts if I did videos as opposed to writing, even though I'm a writer at heart, if doing these videos would actually be easier and a better way to get this information out. So that's one question I had for people. And the second question I had for people is I wanted feedback if people had questions to ask me about the Catholic Church and this topic that I want to address. So what I'm doing with the blog and the purpose that I have with doing, or if I transition to doing video blogs, the purpose that I have is I'm submitting a claim. So my claim is that the sexual abuse that happens in the Catholic Church is that it is built into the structure of the church. And that without outside investigations and outside interference, it's going to keep happening and it's going to keep going on unpunished. And so this is going to continue to be a systemic problem worldwide within the Catholic Church. And so to back up that claim, I'm going to write a series of articles or do a series of these videos to support that claim. So I have an array of topics that I want to address. And I've been wanting to do this for a really long time, and I've been brainstorming, and I've done so much research on this subject and trying to organize my thoughts. So this has been quite a few years that I've been wanting to do this, and I've finally gotten it kind of neatened up enough that I'm ready to do it. And also I've been through enough therapy where I feel like I can finally talk about it without it being triggering to me and my own trauma. So the catalyst to me finally writing my first blog piece was that last 2 weeks ago, the Vatican made a statement saying that they were going to revise their canonical law in regards to punishments for certain transgressions against the church. Now this was specifically, it was their Code 6, which is their penal code. And what I did in that particular blog post was I broke down exactly what that meant, because to me I went, oh, this is a good thing, so we're moving forward. And so I went and I researched and I read the Canon Law Code 6, the actual Canon Law Code 6. And if you didn't read that blog, it's still posted on my Facebook, you can go to it. And I actually posted a link to the actual Code 6 law. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually break down what I wrote in that blog for you right now. The Catholic Church, because it operates out of Vatican City, and that is a sovereign state, it doesn't follow other countries' it doesn't go through other countries' judiciary system. So it has its own internal judiciary system, which is why it basically, that what happens in the church stays in the church. It handles its own sexual abuse cases, okay? Which is why I'm saying that without outside investigation, that abuse will keep happening. It's already proven that is the case, right? Anyway, Code 6, it had 3 main transgressions that it revised, that it addressed. The first one being stealing of money or money laundering, and that came to light because of a couple different things happened there, but the main thing was the Pope's financial advisor. He laundered money from the Pope's charitable fund. It's called Peter's Pence, and he got into some shady real estate dealings with this real estate mogul, which went south. And then he also invested money into some Hollywood movies, like Elton John's movie, and then I think there was some other movie with, I believe it was Will Smith, that it tanked. Anyway, this came to light because actual like parishioners, like people who had donated to that fund, knew about it. They found out about it somehow, and they were like, I gave that money, I donated that money with the intention that money was going to go to people in need, not that that money was going to get the Vatican, that you were investing into Elton John's biopic, So they actually brought a lawsuit against the Vatican, and the Vatican was kind of like, oh, well, we didn't know. It was our financial advisor. So they threw the financial advisor under the bus, and they kind of served him up on a silver platter as a sacrificial lamb, which, if you follow me on this journey, you will find happens a lot. They like to kind of pick one person to serve up as a sacrificial lamb. So I will down the road actually do an entire video or blog post about that financial advisor, because it's very intricate and complex, because he's also connected to the Australian Cardinal Pell, who served a year in prison for actual sexual abuse of 2 boys. So that's a whole other blog post. It's very complicated. All right, second transgression that got revised or tweaked or whatever was the Ordination of Women. And so before I even talk about that, I'm going to talk about the penal system in the Catholic Church, which is very divine in nature. So the Vatican has a jail, but as of late, the only people that have actually served time in the Vatican jail were people who got caught stealing secrets from the Vatican archives. So it speaks to how much the church cares about keeping their secrets. So nobody else has really spent time in the Vatican jail. The penal system in the Catholic Church really more so has to do with like divine penalties. So for example, like going to confession, saying you're sorry to a priest, stuff like that, to maybe losing your ability to say mass, losing your the ability to wear cleric clothes if you're a priest, and then excommunication, which people might be familiar with that term even if you're not a Catholic. But just to break down what that means is, if you're excommunicated, it means you cannot receive the Holy Sacrament. So you can't like get communion, which is that little wafer. You cannot get last rites. So if you're dying, like you cannot get, like the priest can't come and do that little cross on your forehead and say, like, oh, you're good, you go to heaven now. So to a Catholic, I definitely understand the gravity of that penalty. I was raised Catholic, so I certainly understand it. It means that your soul is in danger for eternal damnation. So it means that, okay, well, I'm at risk of spending an eternity in hell. And that's very scary to a Catholic. One can be excommunicated just by their bishop in their individual diocese. So I can get into this too if anyone has questions about how like dioceses get broken up and everything. I can talk about that as well. But one can get excommunicated by just their individual bishop, and that bishop can actually revoke that excommunication and go, say if you're dying, go, all right, I'll give you last rites, that's fine. But the most harshest penalty is if you are excommunicated to the Apostolic See, which is where only the Pope can revoke that excommunication. And it is really difficult to get the Pope's ear. So this harsh penalty you would get if you like assaulted the Pope, if you desecrated the Eucharist. And when I say Eucharist, it would have to be those little wafers after they've been blessed and consecrated into the body and blood of Christ, because Catholics believe that those little like wafers actually turn into the literal body and blood of Christ. A little cannibalistic, but who am I to judge? Okay, so one thing that's been added to that list of things that could get you excommunicated to the Apostolic See is if you're a woman and you try to get holy orders, meaning if you try to become ordained a priest. So in the year 2021, the Catholic Church is just kind of doubling down on their misogyny and keeping women out of leadership roles. All right, so here we go. Now we're going to get to the crux of the matter, which is their laws on sexual abuse. All right, first of all, we need to talk about the fact that they don't use the term abuse in their Code 6. They call it the a sin against the sixth commandment, which is adultery. So the church still views sexual relationships with children as an equivalent to like a politician cheating on his wife. So, okay. Now, the harshest penalty that the church has to offer to somebody is to be excommunicated, reserved to the Holy See. So they do that to women who try to become ordained a minister, a priest or deacon. But for priest raping kids, that punishment does not apply. They could potentially lose their like clerical like state. They could. It's not a requirement that happens. They could be temporarily suspended. However, nowhere in Code 6 does it say that they would report these people to civil authorities. So, in fact, they are tightening the reins on what gets handled within church, like church walls. So, originally it was priests, bishops, cardinals, anybody that is a clergy member, everything gets handled in-house. So you don't report it to civil authority. Everything gets handled within that internal judiciary system. Now they are saying that even lay people, so like teachers, janitors, secretaries, anybody that works within that church, if they are on the church's payroll, if there's any kind of accusation of sexual abuse with a minor or sin against the sixth commandment, that needs to be reported within the church, and that needs to go through the internal judiciary system. And if you're skeptical, like, well, maybe they just mean that they really want to keep their records, within the church, and they'll still report it to civil authorities because, these people are mandatory reporters, right? The Pope actually said in a letter with this, when he sent out this revised canon law, that the point of this was to keep the punishments as like outside of civil authorities, to limit the amount of punishments outside of civil authorities. So that really is their objective. They want to keep as little like out of civil authorities as possible. So they really are trying to now tighten the reins and keep things inside. So they're really they're battening the hatches down, okay, when it comes to this shit, because they realize that like, oh, it's not just our priests who are doing this in the church, it's also sometimes teachers or janitors or secretaries. One positive, because I always will try to look for positives, and I will try to look for glimmers of hopes when it comes to the Catholic Church and their statements that they make and their revisions, is that they acknowledge that grooming happens, and they acknowledge that there is a power difference between someone who is in a position of authority over a lay person. So they acknowledge it. So they went, okay, well, adults can also be raped by priests. Yes, it is 2021, and they are finally acknowledging that, someone who is in a position of authority can use that authority to manipulate, abuse, and then get sexual favors over a layperson in their church. And so they did finally acknowledge this. However, they use the term vulnerable adult, which is often associated with somebody who is mentally or physically incapacitated. So the language is still like a little bit unclear, but they claim that what they mean by that is somebody who is in a position of, who is under somebody who is in authority over them. So that they are including this in a sin against the sixth commandment. While I consider this a step forward, I also really want to urge the church to stop calling these things like rape, sexual abuse of minors, child pornography, a sin against the sixth commandment, which is adultery. These things are abuse. Call them what they are. I get that you want to follow your holy book or whatever, but until you start actually criminalizing it and giving it the gravity that's due, then no real changes can be made. So this is where the church's view on sex leads to very little action being taken and not the appropriate punishments being taken. So until the church views like the rape of children and child pornography and the rape of like adults as well by priests, rape in general, then they're not going to actually step up to the plate and take appropriate action because they view a priest and a child in a sexual relationship as that being an actual sexual relationship, and the priest just happening to break his celibacy vows, and so it happened to be with a 6-year-old. Okay, the priest said he was sorry, let's all move on. Then nothing's happening and nothing's being done about it that needs to be done, and that priest is not being taken away from society, removed from society that needs to be protected from that priest, and more children are continuing to get hurt. I have notes. Okay. Moving on. What I want to continue to cover in these series is my next blog post that I actually want to talk about is how the same day that the Pope made this statement about revising canonical law, I don't think it's any accident that in Canada they found 215 child remains on a school that was run by the Catholic Church. And so not the first time that child remains were found at a Catholic school. So I want to talk about that. I want to talk about how they have yet to apologize for it or to give any further information so that there could be any closure for these families about who these children were. I also want to talk about the theme of the church taking advantage of minority communities and also poorer communities, as using them as a dumping ground for pedophile priests, with the assumption that those communities don't matter, those people don't matter, and that they're not going to speak up when something goes wrong because they abuse their power over those communities to a much higher degree than to maybe wealthier white communities. And there is a pattern there. So there is an actual a pattern of that, and there is a paper trail to support that pattern. I want to talk about the bankruptcy filings that are halting civil suits by victims. I want to talk about the mentality, I touched a little bit of this, of the mentality of sexuality in children that the church has, and purity culture, which if you grew up in any kind of Christian religion, purity culture was a big deal, and it is damaging. It is damaging psychologically. It is damaging. It is body shaming, and I don't know if people really grasp the severity of it and just how bad it is. This whole concept of waiting until you're married, that how being a virgin is such a gift to give to your husband or wife, everything about it. And so the church is a huge proponent of that, and it is exceptionally damaging, especially when your priest is the one that steals your virginity. So we'll get into that. Okay. The belief that the church has this belief that most accusers lie. And so I actually have actual document about that where they admit that they have this belief that most of the accusers are lying and that they're after money. Even though there is enough of statistic and evidential support that only 1 to 3% of accusations are actually false. Okay. They think that it's more like 50%. And I also want to talk about the playbook that the church uses to discredit victims, which is just basically re-victimization and a rehashing of abuse. I want to talk about the persecution complex they have, which ties in with this whole idea that 50% or more of victims are lying just to try to steal their money and tarnish the church's reputation. I want to talk about the lobbying against child protection bills and how the church has a vested interest, and they pour all this money into lobbying against bills that would protect children. So if they really did care about making a difference, and if they really did care about protecting children, then they wouldn't be pouring all this money and lobbying against bills that are put in place to protect children from them. Okay. I also want to share with people resources that are really helpful and really beneficial. So there is a resource called the bishopsaccountability.org where you can go on and you can actually see lists of credibly accused priests. And when I say credibly accused priests, it means that the church themselves have said that they found these accusations to be credible. Remember what I just said about how the church actually thinks in their mentality that most people, most victims that come forward are lying. So if the church is saying, okay, we investigated this and we think that these priests are credibly accused, this is the list of priests that are, from the church's standpoint, credibly accused, and they gave this list to bishopsaccountability.org. I actually really encourage people to go onto this website and just scroll through the last name of A's and time how long you have to scroll down to get to the next letter. It is like absurd. It's absurd. You could wallpaper an entire like state with just the list of names. It's just crazy. So go to bishopsaccountability.org. They also list so many articles. There's just so much information on there. It's an incredible archive that's all volunteer based. So they're just great. The other organization is SNAP, which is Survivors Network of Abused Priests. So if you happen to be a survivor of abuse, that is a good resource. They have a lot of online meetings right now. Everything's online. So they have, I'm actually going to be doing a conference today, which is about how you can take your voice and advocate for change, and how they are doing all these bills. This group, SNAP, is the one that is really pushing to get the statute of limitations for child sexual abuse pushed further, and how they're trying to make priests become mandatory reporters and everything like this. So SNAP is really the church's enemy, and I kind of like being a part of it. All right, so the last thing that I want to share with you is, or that I will share in the future, is I'll put in different documentaries that I've watched and stuff. I'm not going to talk about really big stories, like for instance like The Keepers or stuff like that, because there are documentaries you can watch that will go into detail about those stories. I'll just share those documentaries and you can go and check them out yourself, but I personally won't go into detail about those stories, because those documentaries can do a better job at telling those stories than I could. All right, and the last thing that I really want to make sure I get across is that I don't hate Catholics. I actually feel like Catholics are the victims of the church. And so what I'm trying to do, and the purpose of this, is to rip the veil off of the charade that the hierarchy of the church is doing, and help people to see that they're actually victims, and to expose what they're doing. And I really want to wake people up to the malevolence that the people, the hierarchy that is running the Catholic Church, what they are. Because they're hurting your children. They're kind of pious about it. They don't care. They're almost laughing in your face about it because they're continuing to get away with it. And they're hurting people's families. They're tearing people apart. And they really cannot get away with it any longer. And there needs to be an outside investigation into it. And with the not even talking about just the sexual abuse of children, but the financial, like the financial stuff, the criminal like activity that happens. So I really want to get across that I don't have a prejudice against people having a Catholic faith, because I understand it, because I grew up in it. And I actually had an exceptionally strong Catholic faith for a very long time. And so I completely empathize with that. But what I want to express to people is that the church itself is exploiting that to gain access to your children, to abuse them, and then to tear your family apart, and then to just bulldoze over that and perpetuate this continued criminal ring. And so what I hope that people will gain from this is some knowledge, because knowledge is power. If you have the knowledge about what's happening, then you can make the decision going forward. So Sorry that this is so long, because obviously there's a lot to cover and there's so much that I didn't. So I will, like I said, I will pick a topic, like dive in. They'll probably be like 20 minutes long each time. And then if anyone has any other subjects or questions that they would like me to talk about, I'd be more than happy to. I am well versed on the subject, partly from personal experience, unfortunately, and then just from my plethora of research. So thank you if you watched this. I appreciate you sticking with me and watching the whole thing. Please share. Please, share with your friends, share with your family, share with your Catholic friends and family. Okay, don't be afraid to. All right. Bye, guys.